You're walking through a forest at dusk. The birds are singing, insects humming, the whole place alive with noise. Then, all at once, it stops. Every bird goes quiet. The crickets fall silent. The frogs cut off mid-croak. The whole forest seems to hold its breath. You feel it before you understand it, a wrongness pressing on the air. 9 minutes later, the ground begins to shake. And for those 9 minutes, the animals knew and you didn't. You never see it start. You only feel the end of it. This exact thing has happened for thousands of years. In 373 BCE, in the Greek city of Halik, animals fled days before a quake swallowed the town. Dogs, rats, snakes, weasels, all gone before the first tremor. The people stayed behind. The animals knew something they didn't. So what on earth did they hear? Here's the thing, nobody tells you about earthquakes. The shaking is the last part to arrive, not the first. Long before your floor ever moves, something is changing underground. And animals, from tiny toads to enormous elephants to the dog at your feet, seem to catch it. You'd think the ground gives no warning at all. That an earthquake just happens out of nowhere, with no signal, no whisper, nothing. But that silence in the forest isn't nothing. It's a reaction. Something spooked every animal at once, and they all did the same strange thing. They went completely still. Across cultures and across centuries, the reports are weirdly consistent. Birds stop singing. Cattle refuse to move. Snakes crawl out of frozen ground in the dead of winter. So what are they sensing that we simply can't? And why, of all things, does everything go quiet? It's not one thing. It's never one thing. There are several layers stacked here, and each one is stranger than the last. Some of it is sound you were never built to hear. Some of it is chemistry leaking straight out of the rock. And some of it is a chain reaction of pure fear that ripples through a whole ecosystem in seconds. By the end, I'll show you the wildest part of all. The thing that turns an ordinary herd of animals into something no seismograph on Earth can replace. And it might just change how you see the pets in your own home. Stick with me, because the last layer is the one that stays with you. Let's go. Let's start with the silence itself. When an animal senses a danger it can't identify, it usually doesn't run first. It freezes. Think about a rabbit sitting in an open field. A hawk's shadow slides across the grass, and the rabbit turns to stone. No movement, no sound, barely even breathing. That total stillness is survival. A moving animal is a visible animal. A silent, frozen one might just live to see tomorrow. This freeze reflex is ancient, older than almost any other instinct. It sits deep in the brain, below thought, below choice. The animal doesn't decide to freeze. Its body freezes first, and the fear catches up after. Now scale that instinct up to an entire forest. When one animal freezes, the animals around it notice instantly. A songbird stops mid-note because the insects went quiet. A deer lifts its head because the bird stopped singing. Here's the wild part. Silence spreads faster than sound ever could. Within seconds, a whole ecosystem can lock up tight, each creature reacting to the sudden stillness of the one beside it. So the eerie quiet before a quake isn't magic at all. It's thousands of animals slamming the same panic button at almost the same moment. But that just raises a much harder question. What hits the button first? What does that very first animal sense seconds, or even days before the shaking, that screams at it to freeze? To answer that, we have to go underground. Because an earthquake doesn't begin when you feel it. It begins long before, in ways your body was never designed to notice. And it turns out some animals absolutely were. Before we dig into the how, let's sit with just how old this pattern really is. This isn't a modern internet rumor. People have been writing this down for well over 2,000 years. That Greek city, Helike, was recorded by ancient historians. Days before the disaster, they wrote, "The animals simply left." In Japan, folklore blamed earthquakes on a giant catfish thrashing underground. Silly on the surface, sure, but real fishermen swore that catfish grew restless and jumped right before quake struck. Scientists have now gathered more than 700 separate reports, tied to roughly 160 different earthquakes. The strange behavior spans over 130 species. Sheep, goats, snakes, fish, dogs, cattle, birds, insects. That is not one animal being weird one time. That is a pattern echoing across the entire animal kingdom, over and over, for millennia. A recent study in Siberia tracked dogs before a quake. A small but real number of them started barking, howling, and pacing anxiously minutes to hours before it hit. And it isn't only pets and livestock, wild animals do it too. There are reports of zoo animals refusing to eat, birds abandoning their nests, and fish thrashing at the surface of ponds. Different species, different continents, different centuries, all landing on the same eerie behavior. Here's the catch though, stories are not proof. Ancient people were terrified of earthquakes and desperate for warning signs. When you're desperate for a sign, you tend to find one everywhere. So for centuries, this stayed pure folklore, fascinating but unprovable. What finally changed was our ability to actually measure it, to wire animals up with sensors and watch what their bodies do. And when scientists finally did that, some of the numbers were genuinely hard to explain. Suddenly, the old folklore didn't sound quite so foolish anymore. It started to look like a question worth taking seriously. So let's go underground and start with the simplest explanation. Every earthquake sends out two different kinds of waves. Scientists call them P waves and S waves. The P wave is the fast one. It races out ahead, moving up to twice the speed of the wave chasing behind it. The S wave is the slow, violent one. That's the shaking that cracks the walls and topples the buildings. Now here's the key detail. The P wave arrives first, but it's gentle. Far too gentle for you. Your body simply can't feel it. A seismograph catches it in an instant, but you feel absolutely nothing. Think of thunder and lightning for a second. The flash reaches you long before the rumble does. The P wave is the flash of an earthquake. The S wave is the thunder that follows. You only ever notice the thunder. To a human, the P wave is silence, but to a dog, that same wave might be a knock at the front door. Many animals can feel vibrations far, far weaker than we ever could. So when that first faint wave rolls through the ground, they may sense it seconds before the real quake lands. It isn't prediction, it's just better hearing. And that's not a metaphor, that's straight physics. The gap between the two waves can be a couple of seconds, or stretch, to a minute or two, depending on how far away the quake is born. It doesn't sound like much, but for an animal, a minute is. More than enough time to stop, look up, and go bolt still. So part of the silence is honestly simple. They feel the first wave and freeze before we even know it arrived. But this only explains the animals that react seconds ahead. It can't explain the toads that vanished 5 whole days early. For that, we need something a lot stranger than a wave. Now let's talk about the sounds you were never meant to hear at all. Humans hear a surprisingly narrow slice of the world. Roughly 20 hertz at the low end, up to 20,000 at the very top. Below that floor lies infrasound, sound so low it's felt. In the chest, more than heard in the ear. And a huge number of animals basically live down there. Elephants are the undisputed masters of it. They send out deep rumbles below 20 hertz that roll across the land for miles. And they don't only hear with their ears either. Elephants have special receptor cells packed into their feet. Those cells pick up vibrations straight through the ground. An elephant can feel another herd walking miles away, just through the soles of its feet. So imagine what a straining, stressed fault line might sound like to an animal like that. To an elephant, the ground is never truly silent. It's a constant low conversation of distant footsteps and shifting earth. A fault about to slip could ring out like a bell nobody else can hear. Dogs live in a wider world than us too. They hear up to 45,000 hertz, nearly double our entire range. The deep creaks and groans of rock grinding under pressure may make faint sounds and vibrations long before anything actually breaks. To us, the ground is dead silent, but to them, it might be humming, cracking, quietly whispering that something big is on its way. So when your dog suddenly stares at a blank wall and won't stop pacing, it might not be nothing at all. It might be listening to a frequency you simply don't have the ears for. But sound is still only half of this story. Because the ground doesn't just make noise before it breaks, it leaks. Here is where it gets genuinely, deeply strange. When rock is squeezed under enormous pressure, it changes. Deep in the crust, stressed rock can release gases and charged particles up into the air and water. This isn't fringe science, it's actually measurable. And it might explain the single most famous animal case ever recorded. In 2009, a biologist named Rachel Grant was studying a colony of toads near L'Aquila in Italy. She wasn't hunting for earthquakes at all. She was simply counting toads at their breeding pond. Then something completely bizarre happened. 5 days before a major earthquake struck, the region, 96% of the male toads abandoned the pond. Just gone. And this was during breeding season, which toads almost never, ever abandon. The epicenter sat 74 kilometers away, far too far for the toads to have felt any shaking in the ground. So what exactly did they feel? Grant found the toads' great escape lined up neatly, with disturbances way up high in the atmosphere, in a layer called the ionosphere. The leading theory is that stressed rock released charged particles, and those particles changed the water and the air. And the toads tasted it. Amphibians breathe and drink through their skin, remember? Their whole body is basically one giant sensor for water chemistry. A change we'd never notice could hit them like an alarm bell. Something in their pond had suddenly gone wrong, and their small bodies screamed a single command. Leave, now. They weren't predicting an earthquake. They were fleeing a chemical warning we can't even sense. Think about that for just a second. An animal the size of your thumb detected a fault under stress from nearly 50 miles away, days ahead of time. Not by feeling any shake, by tasting the water. So maybe the silence before a quake isn't only about sound. Maybe the very air itself changes, and every animal that breathes it knows. The water tastes wrong, the air feels charged, and long before any wall ever shakes, the pond simply empties out. So now we've got vibration, sound, and chemistry all in play. But here's a serious problem with all of it. Any single animal can just be wrong. A dog barks for 100 different reasons. A toad might leave a pond simply because a hungry heron showed up. One animal, on its own, is basically just noise. So a scientist named Martin Wikelski asked a far better question. What if you stop watching one animal and instead watch the entire group at once? Back in 2016 and 2017, his team strapped motion sensors onto farm animals in an earthquake-prone corner of Italy. 6 cows, 5 sheep, and 2 dogs. They recorded everything through more than 18,000 separate tremors. And they found a genuine pattern. Before the stronger quakes, the animals' collective activity spiked. Not one nervous animal, the whole group, when they were all housed together. Inside the barn, their combined restlessness climbed hours before the shaking ever came. And the closer and stronger the quake, the earlier they reacted. Strangely, this only worked when the animals were packed together. Out alone in the open pasture, the same animals showed no clear pattern at all. It was the group, crowded and connected, that seemed to matter. One jumpy cow means absolutely nothing, but 6 cows, 5 sheep, and 2 dogs all getting restless together. That, right there, is a signal. It's the wisdom of the herd. No single animal is a reliable alarm, but a whole crowd of them, measured carefully, just might be. This is the idea now driving a project to track animals from space, turning herds all around the world into a living, breathing early warning network. Millions of tiny sensors, already wired into the planet, already quietly listening. No factory could ever build a sensor this good. Evolution spent millions of years perfecting it. We just have to learn how to read them. Instead of only building better machines, we might finally start trusting the animals that were here first. Which sounds absolutely incredible. But before you get too excited, I owe you a little honesty. Let's be honest here. None of this is actually settled science. The United States Geological Survey, the people who literally study earthquakes for a living, say it plainly. Despite thousands of years of stories, nobody has ever found a reliable, repeatable link between an animal's behavior and a specific earthquake. And there's a real nagging catch. Animals act weird all the time. A dog barks, a cow gets restless, a flock of birds scatters, and on most days, absolutely nothing happens afterward. We only ever remember the times a quake happened to follow. That's called hindsight, and it quietly fools everyone. It's the same reason a lucky guess feels like a psychic prediction. You forget the 1,000 times nothing happened. You only remember the one time it did. Even Wikelski's farm study drew sharp pushback. Other scientists argued his patterns couldn't be cleanly separated from plain random chance. And then there's Haicheng. In 1975, in Haicheng, China, officials evacuated an entire city, partly because of strange animal behavior. Snakes crawling out of the frozen ground in winter, restless, agitated livestock. Rats staggered around like they were drunk. Chickens flat out refused to go into their coops. Hours later, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake flattened the area. It remains the only successful earthquake evacuation in all of human history. Tens of thousands of people who should have died walked away alive. And yet, scientists still argue about how much the animals truly mattered. So keep that healthy skepticism close, because the real truth here is stranger than a simple yes or no. Here's the part I saved for the very end, and it's easily the wildest one. We keep asking whether animals can predict earthquakes, but that might be the completely wrong question, because a toad has no idea what an earthquake even is. Neither does a cow or a snake or your dog asleep on the couch. They aren't predicting anything at all. They're just reacting, honestly, instantly, to a world absolutely screaming with signals we've all gone deaf to. Think about what we've actually lost. We can't feel the P wave. We can't hear infrasound. We can't taste charged particles dissolved in water. Our world shrank down to what our eyes can see and our ears can catch. Everything below that we filtered out as noise. Millions of years ago, our own ancestors could probably sense far more than we do now. But we slowly traded that raw animal awareness away for language, for tools, for cities. And somewhere along that long road, we simply stopped listening to the ground beneath us. The animals, though, never stopped. That is exactly why. They go silent before we feel a single thing. They aren't trying to warn us. They're just still tuned to a channel we abandoned ages ago. The silence before an earthquake isn't really the animals going quiet. It's the sound of the earth itself speaking, in a language only they still understand. And here's the truth worth remembering. The animals aren't predicting the future at all. They're just paying attention to a present we can no longer feel. So the next time you're outside and everything suddenly goes quiet, the birds, the insects, the dogs sitting at your feet, actually pay attention. Maybe it's nothing, a hawk drifting overhead, a car rolling past. But maybe, just maybe, it's 1,000 animals hearing something you never could. We built ourselves a whole world of concrete and constant noise, and along the way we forgot how to listen to the planet under our own 2 feet. The animals are still down there, ears pressed to the ground, tuned to every faint whisper the earth makes. They can't tell you what's coming next, but they never stopped hearing the story the ground is telling. And when they all fall silent at once, it might just be worth going quiet yourself and wondering what it is they know. Because for once, the smartest thing in the room might be the animal at your feet. If this made you look at your dog a little differently tonight, then you already know exactly what to do.